Mesechus Kiddushin Daf Chavav leaves the topic of kinyanim, acquisitions of avadim, and moves on to acquisitions of other types of property, inanimate. We will begin with the Mishnah, which divides property into two categories: nechasim sheyesh lemachrayis and nechasim she'ein lemachrayis. Now, yesh lemachrayis means property which can be used as a security, which refers to land. Land is always there. Land can't be stolen or really destroyed, so land is used to secure loans, and therefore the Gemara always refers to it as land that is secure. Yesh lemachrayis. Any movable objects which are destroyable or can be stolen or lost are called nechasim she'ein lemachrayis, and they have very different halachos in a number of categories. So let's begin the Mishnah. The Mishnah first discusses how you acquire them, how you transfer title of these types of possessions. So as far as land, which has a security, which is a security, it can be kesef, shtar, or chazaka. By giving the money, it transfers ownership. By writing the contract, it transfers ownership. Or by doing chazaka, which is by demonstrating ownership of the land, working on it, fencing it, one acquires the land itself. None of these things work for movable objects. For that, the only thing that works is Mashicha. About kesef, we shall see whether it works midar rabbanon, but you have to do what's called Mashicha, that is to pull it towards you. Now, there's another manner of acquiring metaltalin, and that's by combining it in a sale with land. And that's if you sell land and movable objects at the same time in one deal, then the acquisition of the land can also acquire the movable objects for you. And that's what's called a kinyan agav. And the acquisition of the land would be through one of the three kinyanim which we mentioned before. Another way in which land and metaltalin can work together is about swearing. The halacha is that one does not swear on land. Any of the standard types of situations in which one would have to swear, one doesn't have to swear if the object at issue in the dispute is land. However, if it's a mixture of land and movable objects, which we'll call metaltalin from now on, then you can have a requirement for shavua extend from the metaltalin to the land, to the karka. We now begin the Gemara, which looks for the sources of the three kinyanim of karka, and then works through the rest of the Mishnah. So how do you know that you can purchase land with kesef by transferring the money you're going to use to pay for it? So Gemara brings the pasuk which we've had in Sefer Yirmiyah. It says, "So this b'kesef yiknu." You can purchase fields with money. So Gemara asks, but the next words are v'chasav b'sefer v'chasayim. You have to actually write it down in a document. So maybe the only way you can acquire land is with money and a document together. That's what the pasuk says. So Gemara says, no, it says yiknu before it talks about the document. So this b'kesef, fields with money, yiknu you've acquired. And then in kasav b'sefer v'chasayim, that's just to prove that this transaction happened. It's not part of the kinyan itself. Now, Rav says that you can, however, change, and this is dependent on what you make up in that specific scenario. So if you're in a place where people don't usually write a shtar, it makes sense that the kinyan works without the shtar. But if you're in a place where the general practice is to write the shtar, to write the document, and the document is part of the transaction, then the kinyan doesn't work until you actually get the document. Similarly, you can put into the agreement what the acquisition will be. So for example, the Gemara says the buyer can make up that he wants it to be either the money or the document, and he gets the right to choose. So Gemara shares that Rav Idi Bar Oven used to buy land, and he would write that. He would say that if I want the acquisition is my money, and if I want the acquisition is the document. Now the money always comes first. So he wanted to be able to block the seller from pulling out of the deal once the money was given, because then he could say, no, the money is the kinyan. And he wanted the ability on his own to be able to pull out of the deal until he got the contract. So he would say, he could have chosen to say the contract is the kinyan afterwards. That leaves his options open. Next, the Gemara speaks about a kinyan shtar, acquiring land with a contract. The Gemara asks, what is the source for that? Don't tell me it's the same in pasuk as before, where it says v'kosav v'sefer v'chasayim. We've already said that's not talking about a contract of sale. That's talking about a document of record, just to prove that it actually happened. So what then is the source? So the Gemara quotes a different pasuk in Sefer Yirmiyah a few pasukim earlier, where it says, and I took the document of sale. So you see that you can have a sale that is controlled just by the document and not by the money. So Shmuel says, no, this is not true when it talks about sale. It's only our Mishnah and this halacha of transferring ownership of land with a document is only on a gift where there's no money involved. Then the transfer is the document. But if there's money, the seller does not fully give over ownership until he receives the money. Just because he has a document is not enough for him, and therefore there's no actual transfer until the money is received. So the Gemara has a kasha on that. We have a brisa. Rav Huna brings it. It says, how does an acquisition work with a shtar, with a document? He writes on a piece of paper or on a parchment, even though it doesn't have a shavar pruta, so that it's not about the value. He says, my field is sold to you, or my field is given to you. So then it's sold and given. So you see that you can sell even though you're just using the shtar. You don't have to have money that's involved. So Gemara says he answered. There's two answers here. One answer is given by Rav Huna himself. He says that we're referring to where this field is in really bad shape and the seller wants to get rid of it as fast as he can. He urgently wants to close the deal, and therefore he has Gimir Sadas even though he didn't receive the money. The other answer is Rav Ashi. He says this entire Mishnah, this entire Brisa is not talking about a sale, it's talking about a gift. And even though it says that the field is given, the field is sold, he wrote sold in order to increase the power of the receiver, so that he can have the halachas of a purchaser, not just the halachas of one who receives it as a gift. That is, if he loses the field because it's collected by a creditor, then he can claim that he's owed the money that he paid for it, even though he didn't really pay for it, because he has the document that says that it was a sale to him. Okay, third, the Gemara discusses Kinyan Chazaka. I didn't know that works. Mar quotes a pasuk also in Yirmiyah. V'shavu be'oreichim asher tefastem. You should live in the cities which you grabbed. This is Gedaliah ben Achikum speaking to the remnants of the Sheres Pleita. So he says that you live in the cities and you acquire the cities by v'shavu. They are oreichem because tefastem, because v'shavu, because you lived in them, you acquire them. Rishamal brings a brisa has a different source. It says you will inherit them and you will live in them. You inherit them, you complete the inheritance by living in them. Okay, next the Gemara discusses mitatlin, movable objects which don't have a chayas, no security. So there you have to do mashicha. So how do you know that? So Gemara quotes the pasuk when you purchase something from your friend, it has to be from the hand of the friend. So something which is transferred from hand to hand, that's mashicha. So the Gemara asks that Rav Yochanan holds that midaraisa, money is the kinyan for metaltalin. He holds that it's only midarabanan that we have to do mashicha, but midaraisa is supposed to do kinyan kesef. Now Rish Lakish says the reverse, but the Gemara asks, according to Rav Yochanan, you just brought me a pasuk that says kinyan of mashicha. So how is he going to understand this if he holds that the kinyan is midaraisa? So where it says he will learn that this Mishnah is not talking about the kinyan daraisa, and therefore he doesn't bring a pasuk. He says that it's only midarabanan. Okay, next the Gemara moves on to discuss kinyan agav, which is that you can acquire metaltalin along with the acquisition of karka, with one of the karka kinyanim. So Gemara first says, what's the source for that? The Gemara quotes a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, talking about the sons of Yushafat. It says, V'yitin lahem aviyim matanais. The father gave them gifts, and later in the pasuk it says, Im orei mitzurois b'Yehuda, with the cities of Yehuda. So you see that there was a transfer of the metaltalin, the gift, along with the cities, which are real estate. Okay, now the Gemara's question is, how does this work halachically? Is the metaltalin required to be on the land that's being transferred, or could it be someplace else? Some more quotes of Yosef, who wants to bring a proof from a brisa discussing the minimum amount of land that can be used for various different things that require land. Quotes of Kiva, who says that if you have the tiniest bit of land, if you have a kol shehu, so you have to take payah from that. He can bring bikurim. The halacha is in order to bring bikurim and say the parsha of bikurim, where it says the land you've given me, you have to own land. And also he can use it to write a prusbul. A prusbul can only be written for someone who has land and that there's a shiba, that there's a lien on the land. Now, the next thing it says is that you can use it also for kinyan agav. You can use a tiny bit of land to do a kinyan of nechasim she'ein lamachayis with nechasim she'esh lamachayis. So Gemara says, if it's a tiny bit of land and you're telling me that there's a requirement to put it on there, what could you fit on a tiny spot of land? Obviously, there's no requirement that it should be on it. So the Gemara says, why not? Rav Shmuel Bar Bisna said in front of Rav Yosef, it's talking about a needle. You stuck a needle in the land. So Rav Yosef said, you're causing me pain with this. Why would the Mishnah go out of its way to teach me a halacha of a kinyan of a needle? So Gemara says, why not? Rav Ashi says, maybe the needle is part of a brooch of fancy jewelry, and there's a pearl on it that's worth 1,000 zuz, and therefore it is important for the Mishnah to teach me this halacha. Gemara therefore now moves on to try to bring another proof that you don't have to have the metaltalin on the karka. Markotzer Belazar says it was an incident that happened with a Meduni, somebody from the place called Medun. It was in Yerushalayim, and he had a lot of metaltalin, and he wanted to give it as a gift. And they said to him, the only way that you can accomplish it, the Gemara will explain later why, but the only way you can accomplish it is to do kinyan agav, and he didn't have any land. So he said, okay, I'm going to go acquire some land. And he went and he bought a base sela near Yerushalayim, and he said, this goes to such and such individual, and with it he acquires 100 sheep and 100 barrels. And the Chachamim said that works, the transfer is effective. Now, a base sela, what is that? So a sela is a coin. So Gemara assumes that this means that he bought a coin-sized piece of land. If he bought a piece of land the size of a coin, then he didn't put any sheep or barrels on it. So you see, it doesn't have to be on it. There's no base sela doesn't mean the size of a coin. Base sela means that it was hard like a coin, or hard like a rock. Sela means a rock as well. And the reason he bought hard land is because it's not fit for planting, and therefore it's very cheap, and he only wanted to use it for a kinyan agav. So he bought hard land, put the sheep and the barrels on it, let's say, and transferred ownership in that way. Gemara now brings another proof. This is very similar to the previous one, and it will help us explain what was going on in the previous one in the Gemara's discussion. So Gemara quotes somebody who wanted, again, give property. He was in Yerushalayim, he wanted to give a gift. There's two versions as to whether he was sick or healthy. So the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, whether a sick man, a shchiv meirah, needs to do regular kinyanim, or just when he says, give this to someone, we give it automatically. So we have to be referring to a case where he needed to do kinyanim. So if you want to hold like Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that you still need to do kinyanim, he could have been sick. If you want to hold like the Chachamim, then he has to have been healthy, otherwise you wouldn't need any kinyanim. But either way, kinyanim was required, and he wanted to give property over to someone, and they told him again, and we'll have to explain this later, they told him the only way to do it is a kinyan agav. So he went and he bought a base roiva, that is a piece of land large enough to plant a roiva hakav, not a very large piece of land, close to Yerushalayim, and he said 1 square tefach of land is given to such and such individual, and with it he acquires 100 sheep and 100 barrels. And then he died. And the Chachamim say that the gift counts. It's chal, and we don't have any issue with it. So you see, kinyan agav, obviously, the metaltalin does not have to be on top of the land, because you can't fit 100 sheep and 100 barrels into one square tefach of land. So Gemara answers, no, he wasn't giving real barrels and sheep, he was giving the value of barrels and sheep, he was giving just money. It was like $1,000 bill, and he put it on the land, and that, therefore, it could be that he acquired it. Says Gemara, I'll prove it to you that that's what happened over here. Because if he was actually giving the sheep in the barrels, why didn't you just do kinyan chalipin? Why did they tell him you have to do kinyan agav? Let him do chalipin. Obviously, then, the reason they couldn't do chalipin is because we're talking about money. And the halacha is you cannot acquire cash with chalipin. So the Gemara says, well, we're not going to agree with that, because if you're right, why didn't you just do mashicha? The reason the Mashiach must be is because the person wasn't there. The one who wanted to give the gift to wasn't present to do Mashiach. So he wasn't present to do Chalipin either. That's why he didn't do Chalipin. So that's not a proof. So Mara then asks, okay, once we're on the subject, why didn't he just give it to someone else? Let him do a zechus to someone else. He can give their property to a third party and say, when you pick it up, you are Moishech, you acquired it on behalf of the one that I want to receive it. So Gemara says no, because the receiver didn't trust all the people around. He thought they weren't going to give it to him. They were going to eat it up themselves. And therefore, he said, I'm not going to have smichas adas. I'm not going to accept it if you give it through a zechiyah, through someone else there at that time. And therefore, so the Gemara says, so why do we say that there's no solution other than Kinyan Agav? There was a solution. He could have done Mashiach, he just didn't want. And says, no, we meant that according to the fact that he didn't want to do Kinyan Mashiach, there was no remaining solution besides for Kinyan Agav. Okay, the Gemara brings another proof. This is an incident with Rabban Gamliel and the Zakanim were traveling on a ship, and Rabban Gamliel realized that he hadn't taken off Truma and Meiser. So Gamliel said to the Zakanim, the Meiser that I'm going to take off in the future is given to Yeshua ben Chananya, who was a Levi, and the place in which it's in is rented to him. So now he has the land. And then the Meiser that I'm going to take off is given to Akiva ben Yosef, in order that he should give it to the Aniyim, that is Meiser Ani, and its place is rented to him as well. So again, why did he rent them the land? Obviously, he held that you need to have the items on the land, and you can transfer possession of the land. Which is not necessarily. He just didn't want to trouble them to have to move it, so he gave them ownership of the land, and then they can keep it there as long as they want.